Okay, so welcome everybody to Favro Startups, Remote Startups and Enterprises. I'm John Musley, and I'm here with the CEO and co-founder of Favro, Patrik Palm, and we have our special guest today, Patrik von Bergen. Welcome, Patrik.
Thank you.
So let's get things started. I'm going to hand it off to you, Patrik, to get the ball rolling.
All right, great. So I will keep the intro very short. I just want to say something. How we got into this. Why we created Favro in the first place. Favro or Favro. You can pronounce it whatever way you want. And in many ways, I actually picked the right T-shirt for it today. United in simplifying complexity. And it's very much really what we set out to do. We together with my two fellow co-founders, we built another company before that was very focused on software development organizations and product development, and was a platform for agile development at very large scale. They're used in telecom, aerospace, defense, game development, and we thought we wanted to do this in a more modern way, where it's going to be a cloud-based platform, but with enterprise-grade security and data governance. We wanted it to really adapt to the different ways different teams work. It's going to be very relevant, I think, for the conversation today, because what we saw that there was really only two choices of tools in the market. Either you were picking something quite enterprise oriented, like Jira, Atlassian Suite, and then processes are very centrally managed. So, you might achieve a high level of alignment, but you do it really with a traditional command and control model. And the tool will very much kind of dictate the process for you centrally. And that doesn't go very well with an agile way of working at scale, because then you're supposed to have teams that are very autonomous, and you're aligning them with the right leadership, culture, setting the right OKRs. But when it comes to the teams, they should operate in an autonomous way. So then maybe we saw companies then picking really well, letting the teams pick really whatever they want, but then you end up with every team having a different tool. So each team might be quite happy, but it's very, very hard to work with alignment of things in an organization, because nothing really fits together. Maybe there's some integrations, but there's no true design for actually helping leaders in this organization aligning towards the company goals, or even to help each team to align themselves towards those company goals. So we wanted to design something with this in mind, something that gives you both team autonomy and adapts to the way each team works in their specific way, and gives you a help with that alignment towards those company goals, without that kind of typical very centralized approach. So that's why we created Favro. And one of the things that's been a lot of fun with building this company are the kind of customers we get to know. I mean, we have a lot of venture-backed startups. They are growing very fast. They're bringing in some money. They're recruiting. So there's a lot of change going on in these companies, and for them, Favro is absolutely perfect. And then we have companies that are big enterprises, and they really want to disrupt themselves. They have agile transformation initiatives, strategic initiatives around agile transformation, and very often they might be collaborating with, for example, you, John, actually helping them, coaching them, through this process, where they go through this change. And then you need to think about the tools. So it's like, okay, we're changing our ways of working. We are hiring maybe a little bit different. We're promoting a little bit different. We're looking for a little bit different leaders. So what about the tools? We probably need to have tools that actually also fit with this, because otherwise the tools will create an organizational gravity that kind of just pulls you back into the old. So that's an important group for us, and those guys are very fun to work with. And then we have the third group, which is really these unicorn companies that were these fast-growing startups, not so long ago, but now are actually pretty big companies. They might even have listed on for example NASDAQ, and for them it's very important. Okay, so how do we stay agile? Are we avoiding becoming kind of like big corporate and boring? And keeping an entrepreneurial spirit and continue to be able to move fast, even though they're actually quite big now. And that's how I met Patrik, because at that time you were at Toby, right. Toby Technologies, and that's one of our clients, and we got to know each other. and now you have been taking the whole mission of helping organizations to be more agile in their whole go-to-market strategy to kind of a next level, with your own business and helping many companies instead. And let's jump into that conversation now. So I think that's a good starting point. I mean, how did you I mean, what is your kind of briefly the background here, and what brought you to all of these things that you're doing today?
Wow, it's a long story, but I think there are two cornerstones. The first one is really like early 2000, or I'd say mid 2000, 2005. I read this book that was just published about Google, because I didn't really understand how the heck they could make so much money. It didn't really make sense. This is 2005, and I thought I was pretty much into technology, and I had like many years of sales and marketing background, and I knew my way around. And I read this book and I realized that they didn't play by the same rules. So it's like a completely different type of concept of go-to-market. So that got me totally intrigued around like the technology side, like how technology plays a completely new role in terms of go-to-market. So then I, as a vice president of sales and marketing of a fairly large organization, like 45 people, I started to work with this. Like I started to implement this, because this was like, we need to be really good at managing this technology set in using that, leveraging that in go-to-market. And then I just realized that pain in the ass. I mean, the concept of different functions and the way we were organized and the way we worked. And then I read Jeff Sutherland's book, Scrum. And that just threw me off. That was like, wow, shit, I need to get my story. And then I used to be, way back, I used to be CEO and chairman for probably like the leading consulting firm implementing like enterprise project management system based on the Microsoft platform. And we were doing like massive project with ABB, telecom operators in Scandinavia. I was in the steering committee in Inter-IKEA System, that's the mother organization of IKEA, facilitating building the technology platform they use for rolling up like 100 IKEA around the world. I mean, this was like black belt, Six Sigma, all the classical like project models, project offices, that whole thing. So I was fairly versatile understanding project methodology, and then I realized you got to pretty much throw that out the window and start all over.
All right, cool. And I know that you're working on some pretty cool articles right now, right? There was one I saw a draft. You have to help me with the title. It's making your marketing organization agile. Kind of go-to-market framework. I think you will summarize this better. But what is the gist of this paper that you're writing right now?
Basically, when I think about this, when I look at an organization, and I please note, I'm not saying a marketing organization. I'm not saying a sales organization. I'm talking more about the go-to-market organization. When we talk about fairly big organization, you have a marketing organization, you have a sales organization, but I think you need to think about it not from those specific functions. So basically, the idea of this article that I published this morning is it uses the quote that actually is behind me, which says that planning plans are useless, but planning is essential. And basically what it says, that all companies have strategies, all companies have goals. You need a tactic, but you need to separate the strategy and your business goals and your tactics from the activities. And that's what I call the go-to-market framework. That is the framework that puts your strategy, your business goals, and your tactics on one level. And then on the abstraction level down, you have the activities, and that's where you're agile. Because a lot of people feel like saying that you're doing agile is just an excuse for not doing plans. And that's like not true. And of course, you mentioned John Doerr's like OKR concept. I mean, it's the basically the same concept of running OKRs, is to have a framework for aligning goals with activities.
So you know, one thing I've seen and discussed quite a bit from the product side is that I remember I was speaker at a product manager conference, and they talked a lot about agile scaling frameworks. And Favro supports them. So Favro supports the SAFe framework. John is certified with that. The so-called Spotify model, I would say is maybe more suitable for many organizations, and Favro is probably the best platform in the world for supporting that. But what I want to get to here is that there we really talk about kind of agile on different levels, team level, product level, program level, so forth. But one of the messages that I was really telling these guys and really got into conversations is that a mistake that I see a lot of organizations do is that they try to optimize by tweaking their processes and their tools. They say their product development organization, another like 10% or maybe 15 or 20%. They want it a little bit more efficient. But the really big big win that you can get in a big organizations is typically rather between, for example, the product organization and marketing. We, for example, have a lot of customers that are game developers that they call it live ops. And we're just before we're starting today, we're talking about a little bit of gaming and games like Warzone, etc. And there's so quick cycles. The cycle from we're going to develop these things, and they need to be marketed, and and this is how we communicate with the community. All of these things, they're so short cycles. So it's so much more important to get away from those silos and actually get those two to actually work in tandem. And when that tandem is really on a cadence of a week, a day, or sometimes even faster than that, that's where the really big win in the organization can happen. Has this been a lot of what is your experiences with this question? Do you find it's well, firstly, do you agree? Secondly, do you find that this is something a little bit kind of hard to chew for executives in many big organizations, or what's your experiences about this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the way I think about this is that a lot of functions in the organization are thinking about doing things right, and by doing things right, you can do it 15% better. You can get but actually that's not the game changer. It's not doing things right, it's doing the right things. So it's really having that mindset. And the way I look when I talk about the go-to-market framework, I think there are two things that I want to address with that, which ties very much into what you are talking about. And the first one is that you get the strategy and the directives becomes very relevant when you plan activities. You're thinking about that this activity is aimed at supporting the tactic that supports this goal or this directive for this, because this is our strategy. You can move up and down in the level of abstraction, which is that's a vocabulary, a way of talking that most organizations don't have. And I don't think anyone like these different frameworks that you're talking about, they do not inherently solve that problem, and nor does my proposed go-to-market framework. So I think this is really about culture. So it's about like creating a culture where someone comes up and this is actually quite interesting. It's like it's a question of if we're going to move like really quick from one week to another and refocus because it's very opportunistic and it could result in us closing this massive deal that then open up this door and so forth. I mean, usually that's not a strategic, someone thinking of it from a strategic perspective. It's usually people just down on the floor, like people solving problems, working that see these openings. And how do you tie the activity, like should we do this or that activity? When someone comes up, these guys released this last week and they did this and that. Guess what? This opened up the opportunity for us to allocate resources, do that. How do you take that activity idea that could be a game changer? How do you move that up to the strategy level and get acceptance for it? And that no framework there are no framework or methods that in itself going to solve that. It's about people and mindset.
How do you find do you see marketing specifically, do you see some specific challenges with driving these initiatives with marketing organizations compared to others?
I think that looking into all different functions, you have 80% is the same, 20% is unique.
Mm-hmm.
So I think yes, but I wouldn't say it's very original from a marketing perspective. I think being the CMO of a fairly large marketing organization, perhaps in an international company or that is established, you have one battle that relates to what people expect you as a CMO to do, which perhaps is not always very worthwhile.
Yeah.
And the second thing, it's marketing is today so much, it's like a technology play. So you need to sort of master that skill set, which, by the way, a lot of your peers in the management team don't expect you to do or care about.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the organization, as built up traditionally, doesn't really support the agile mindset. So yes, there are a lot of things to be said around from the marketing function.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool. I'm before we move over to John here, I'm going to, also, of course, ask you the question a little bit about kind of some specific challenges that you have, you've been solving, using Favro. I'm obviously very curious about that. But before, you answer that, I see that we also have a question here that was directed specifically to me, which is, can you briefly describe or define, your understanding of Agile? This is one of those which is in one way easy to answer, in one way very, very hard. Having been on the kind of Agile scene for more than 15 years now, I think my first keynote was back in 2005. I was one with 3 keynote speakers. The other one was Jeff Sutherland, and the third one was Mike Kwon. So you can imagine I was quite nervous because following up after those guys, it's not that easy. And I did have the privilege to also be a keynote. One other time, kind of like a Scale Agile conference, Jeff Sutherland was the opening keynote, and I was the closing one, and then we had a fireside chat after. That was a lot of fun. So there's been some of those fantastic moments when I from a stage have to kind of give a perspective of these things. But what I try to, if I'm going to put it very briefly now, I think I kind of want to put it in 2 ways. So Agile in itself, wasn't invented. It's really a lot of different practices that, when guys got together in Alta, not too far from, where, Snowbird, not too far from where you used to live, John, in Utah, and they wrote the Agile Manifesto. It's a collection of practices that really works for these products that have a lot of unknowns, and this was obviously in software development in the beginning. And then very specific methods came out of that. Scrum is there's a classic joke that Scrum is the method to convince program managers that Agile is good, and extreme programming is the practice to convince programmers that Agile is good. And you have others, like Crystal and DSDM and so forth. And then you got these kind of scaling frameworks like SAFe and the Spotify model and so forth. Spotify modeling in many ways kind of being adopted, I think, by McKinsey now. So it's getting a lot of impact in the market. So we can talk about these kind of very specific methods, and so we could say that Agile is really kind of an umbrella for these methods that in common have a couple of principles that really all goes back to the Agile Manifesto. Everything is it's more flow based. It's about short iterations and increments of delivery, cross-functional teams, et cetera, right? What's been the big trend, the last couple of years, and really also the origin of Favro, is that the world is moving so fast today, and if you look at kind of challenges, I think Patrik, you touched upon this, that a marketing team today is in many ways much more similar to a software engineering team than what marketing looked like, from an episode of Mad Men, with Don Draper in the corner office. It's much more a data-driven practice, super short iterations. So definitely what's been going on now recently is that it is really the survival of the fittest, that the most adaptable organization is the one that's going to win. So organizations have then started to think, well, this thing that software developers have been doing for a while now to be able to be very adaptable to change. What is how can we use that? So then it's really about kind of being agile, rather than doing agile. So in many ways, this is kind of what we tie into. I'm going to get back down now to you, Patrik, on the answer to my question there on practical things that you saw with Favro, and then we're going to go into some very concrete examples here by John on remote work solutions, with Favro, for example.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, looking at we grew out of, we started off with Trello and basically just grew out of it and felt that it was too limiting. So we looked at, we saw the need because the usage of different type of boards were kind of exploding, and there were different type of functions doing different things. So the whole concept of being able to create relationship between them was very essential. So that drove us to Favro, and of course the ease of use was really. And I think I mean, I think my like aha, like this has nothing to do with and it being a super advanced sophisticated system, but one of my favorite things that I really enjoy is doing retrospectives using a Favro board, and basically have the three columns of stop doing, start doing, continue doing, and have the team come in, sit down, everybody's quiet for 5-10 minutes, and people start just creating cards in the different columns, and rather than creating the same card or same post-it 2 times, people start upvoting the different cards. And then you have, when you're done 10 minutes later, you have the discussion, you go through all the cards, you perhaps write notes on the cards based on what's been said and so forth. And then two magic thing happens. You can just you store away the board, so you have it all documented, done, and you can go back and look at it. But of course, if there are actions derived from this, you just take the card and throw it into whatever process it is. I think that says so much about the spirit of how to think and how to do things. So that's sort of my example.
Yeah, and I mean also pretty clearly, instead of using 3 tools in that situation, you're really only using one, and there's no integrations or anything. All right, awesome. I'm gonna leave a little bit over to John here. We also had one more of a comment on more on the critical side that we're already using technology, so what's the point? And I think that's a pretty long discussion itself. And obviously, it's not about using technology. You can use tools that are absolutely going to be detrimental for any agile initiative, and you can use tools that would rather help you. If we're going to talk about the technology side of things, but what I do actually want to like to point out as a kind of a comment to the comment is that when the maturity when it comes to organization-wide agile, and let's talk more about business agility, is actually much lower. For people like us who's been in the industry and worked with this for a very long time, we feel like, well, isn't this all kind of knowns now? Doesn't everyone already know all of these practices? What's really new to say? But then when you come out to an organization, very often the maturity is very uneven. You might have some people that actually have some teams that are extremely good in their practices, and then you have some teams that that they might say that, yeah, we're agile, we're using Scrum, but actually they're not really doing, they're not getting any results out of that in a good way. It's not like Gartner just started talking about that leaders in IT organizations needs to really think more from a business point of view, and how is technology affecting the organization. They're still very much in thinking kind of very centralized, very kind of old-fashioned thinkings around it. Procurement is typically very old-fashioned still. Mid-management for sure. Mid-management often tends to be quite afraid of these kind of things. What does it mean to be more of an agile leader, to be a servant leader? And they're afraid of losing their jobs. CEOs typically understand these things, quite often at least, but they might not just be high up on their agenda to drive it. So there's a lot of room for organizations to get a lot of effect out of their agile initiatives. Still, this is in terms of kind of a maturity curve on where the market is right now in their agile practices, where software development teams, yes, they have come quite far. I think today it's not really about, are we going to do waterfall or agile? It's just everyone's doing agile. It's more like how good are you at it? But when we talk about the organization as a whole, the maturity level is actually much lower than many of us expect.
I listened to a webinar with Scott Brinker. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, and the martech.com, and he was part of HubSpot. And basically, one of the questions, and he had a webinar about agile marketing, and he talked about the whole setup of working and so forth. And one of the things he asked himself, it was like, this been around forever. Like, why is this not happening more? So I think that certainly has not been addressed. So that's really, the technology is there, but people are not adopting it.
Cool. Awesome. John, so, Patrik, thank you so much. And, feel free to also, to stay to the end. But I do want to switch over now to John here, and some kind of very, practical, examples of some of these things we talked about today. You're still muted, John.
Thank you, Patrik and Patrik. And I think, what this webinar is all about is remote startups and enterprises. And a lot of the talk that we've had so far has been around agile, agile manifesto, agile methods, agile practices, and even those specific to marketing. And I think that's very relevant to what we're talking about today about remote startups and enterprises, because I think people have found that adapting to change, which is really what agile is all about, there's companies who are agile to begin with before the pandemic, before this mass force move to remote. They found that it was much easier to make this transition. Riot Games, which is a Favro client, for example, is much easier to make this transition if you were very agile, if you were born agile, so to say, like the Riot Games of the world, to make the transition to remote, because it's easy to adapt to change the more agile you are. And you made a great point, Patrik von Bergen, about culture. If you have that agile mindset built into your culture, it makes a huge difference, because agile is really just those 4 values, those 12 principles from the manifesto, and then everything that spawned out of it, I think sometimes forgets the core values, the core principles. So moving on more specifically to remote work, we've talked to Patrik, heard a little bit about the backstory of Favro. Now I'm going to dive into more specifically the remote enterprise. I'm working out of presenting this content to you today out of a Favro collection, which I'm going to share to everybody who registered for this webinar and for the people who are online attending today. So thanks again for those attending. As you'll see, all of these cards and all of these boards, they have valuable links to articles, to other collections, all the examples that I'm going to be showing. So make good use of the content that's in these Favro boards and cards that I'm going to share out to everybody who's attending. So to get started, when we first started these webinars, very shortly after this mass, again, forced move to remote, there was lots of different thinking, are we going to be able to be productive? Are we going to be able to survive as a company making this remove to remote? And that's for the vast majority of product and knowledge work, that's proven to be true. You can work remotely. And a lot of teams actually prefer working remotely. But moving forward, as time has progressed, even though there's been all these statements about Facebooks and even Salesforces of the world saying they're going to stay remote forever, it's probably going to be, and most companies are saying, there is a lot of value to that face time, right? That face-to-face collaboration and interaction. We've got a lot of game development customers, for example, that are Favro clients. It's very difficult to have that creativity, I guess, without that face-to-face time. So we're talking more about hybrid strategies right now. And that's exactly what this is. This is an essential strategic conversation that you have to be having internal to your organization. How are we going to be moving forward? And most organizations are having this, already had these conversations. Again, Riot Games, for example, has very publicly came out and said that they're going to be moving to 3 core days in the office, but they've found that employees want flexibility. And I think that's true across all the spectrum of knowledge workers. They really have found that they appreciate this flexibility of working from home and having at least the option to work from home. So this model of 3 core days and 2 flex days, I think is going to become very popular moving forward post-pandemic. Of course, this is going to be on an organization by organization kind of basis, and that's something you have to take into consideration moving forward, looking towards the post-pandemic, hopefully relatively shortly world. As Patrik said, I think it's also important, not just even in a remote environment, but just period, even pre-pandemic, to move away from these centralized tools and centralized command and control ways of working to these more autonomous tools and, of course, more autonomous ways of working. You want to allow the teams, the 7+or-3 cross-functional teams. Speaking of marketing, I think the ultimate, example is you don't even have a marketing department anymore. You just have a cross-functional team that includes some marketing people on it. As Patrik said, that's how fast things are moving. You have to have all the people on the team necessary to actually release these things. And part of that release is the marketing, it's part of the messaging to the customer base. So that move away from more heavy, centralized, kind of prescriptive tools to more flexible tools that allow the teams to work the way they want to work, but also support that alignment of teams is essential. Of course, if you haven't already started an agile transformation or weren't born agile, this pandemic and this move to remote has proven how essential those agile ways of working and that agile mindset is. People were creating remote playbooks. Now they're starting to create these hybrid remote and on-site playbooks. How are things going to work moving forward, right? How are we going to handle remote recruitment? How are we going to handle remote onboarding? How are we going to handle compensation if we're allowing people to move to more inexpensive parts of the country? Is their compensation going to change? Or is it going to be, which I would prefer, value-based compensation? It doesn't matter where you live, it's how much value you're providing to the organization. Things like, are we going to continue to maintain a large, massive, and probably in a very expensive HQ? Or are we going to move to these smaller, more remote hub type offices, which I think is going to become very popular. Also, just this whole idea of hybrid collaboration we have some people off-site distributed, we have some people maybe in the office face-to-face. You have to be able to support that hybrid collaboration. And that's both processes and tools. And of course, that all important kind of remote or distributed hybrid type mindset culture. So kind of just a quick example of this in Favro. And I think Favro is an excellent tool for kind of this. It's proven to be an excellent tool for this remote way of working. Lots of organizations that I've worked with as an agile coach have used it to help ease that transition to remote. A lot of them didn't even have a hiccup because they were using a tool that supported this remote and distributed way of working like Favro to begin with. So speaking of from a strategic standpoint, if I open up this company dashboard, right? So you want to have a big part of working remotely, distributed, even hybrid in agile ways is transparency. So having something like this, a company dashboard where everybody can see something like a company schedule of events or a company roadmap, something like, we're going to move to these smaller hub offices and this is the date we have to have it completed by. Maybe moving into the future, we can actually have sales events and conferences and all those good things again, which hopefully actually happens. And then being able to open up your company portfolio backlog and have that visibility. These are the things prioritized, our strategy. These are the things that are actually going to drive the business moving forward. And having all of those being committed to and flowing through maybe a high-level company portfolio Kanban and roadmap board, like you see here, right? So make all of this very visible, and you can take these cards that you're seeing moving on these boards, like this move product Y to the cloud, for example, which has been moved into an implement stage, and you can break that card down. I mean, this is some of the flexibility that you need in a tool to be able to break that card down to that actual initiative. As you kind of see here, this has been broken down to move product Y to the cloud, to its own backlog, essentially. I can go directly to it. And you can see these are kind of the high level themes of the things that we need to do from a business epic level to make that happen. And then this particular backlog here can be easily moved to an actual product development team, or maybe kind of a program level collection to make that happen. So I'll move it to, say, maybe a product dashboard, or I could send it down to the team level. I could either move it there or add it here. So I could keep it in both places, because the boards, the cards, the backlogs, everything can live in multiple places at the same time in Favro. So if I add that now also exists at the product level, as well as the company overall dashboard level. So that's just one kind of example of that transparency, that visibility that's so important in an agile kind of hybrid, remote, and co-located organization. So moving on to the benefits of remote. So when we first started this, we all kind of thought these things to be true, but now they've proven to be true. There's a reason why these massive organizations are saying we're either going to move to some hybrid model or we're going to stay 100% remote. It's because, number one, it works. And number two, there's just tons of actual benefits. Number one, cost savings, right? Just not having to maintain these large, massive corporate campuses. Reduced travel. Companies have said, we found that we've reduced our overall budgets by 35% just by the reduction in business travel that has proven to be, for the most part, not as necessary as we thought it was. All the utilities, the office insurance, all of the stuff that goes along with having these very large physical spaces, you're saving massive amounts of money not having to maintain all of that. So that's just one of the benefits, right? Another huge benefit to this remote and distributed way of working is you're now able to recruit and also retain the best talent, right? So it's not about, we have to find people in San Francisco, very expensive part of the world where I used to live, right? To run this organization. There's talent all over the world, and the best talent, the best people suited for this particular role or the particular job can bring the most value to the organization could be living all over the world, right? So now in this remote and distributed model, this new way of working or this hybrid way of working, you have access to that entire talent pool. People don't maybe have to relocate and all work in the same massive campus, right? They can be remote and distributed work all over the world. It's about the person and the best person for the job as opposed to location. Something that goes hand in hand with that is diversity. Now, companies, they're creating products and services now, not for a specific demographic or a specific nation or a specific culture. We're creating products that are global products and services. So the more diversity you can have on your teams, the actual people building these products, marketing these products, selling these products, the better, because you're going to bring that perspective, wider range of openness and perspective to the products and services that you're offering. So diversity, another big part of it. People don't have to relocate. You can hire people from backgrounds from all around the world, people you're actually selling your products to. Another example kind of this is, people think of tools like Favro, Asana, Trello, Jira as they're very product development or software development type focus, which is absolutely not true. As Patrik said, it's not just about team level agility. It's about overall organizational business agility. And a great example of that is bringing in recruitment closer to the process. Using this recruitment and HR, people operations, as it's called in more agile organizations, bringing them closer to the process, everybody working together. As you can see here over on this collection pane, this is literally your entire company, an example company in a single tool in Favro. You have, people operations, HR, recruitment, onboarding. You've got your marketing, investments, IT teams, product development teams, sales, all working in a single tool together and sharing boards, cards, and backlogs across these collections. So here in this recruitment Kanban, great example, right? We can visualize who it is we're recruiting for certain roles, all the selected resumes, moving these through a flow of scheduling the interviews, background checks, all the way through to who actually gets hired, and being able to visualize that process as you would any other process, like a product development process. It's the same thing. Okay, so diversity, just happiness. Remote teams give people flexibility. It's just proven to create happier people, which leads to happier teams, and happier teams equal increased innovation, creativity, productivity, and you're going to keep those people. So give them the flexibility. If they want to work from home, let them work from home. If they want to work co-located in an office, give them the availability to do that. Maybe very close to where they actually live, which might not have to be a San Francisco or New York or a Stockholm, right? It can be in what would previously be considered relatively remote locations. So I have a couple of articles here written about that. Again, there's going to be lots of links in each one of these cards that I'm going to send out to you in this overall collection. Now, some of the challenges, of course, there's challenges with this new remote and hybrid way of working. And a lot of it revolves, as Patrik von Bergen said, around the culture. So one of the things we've found working with all these companies of various different sizes that's been universal with this move to remote is that it's amplified both the strengths and weaknesses of any company, whether it's a startup, a mid-sized company, a unicorn, or a large Fortune 500 enterprise. Now, if you had a very command and control, a very management hierarchy heavy organizational structure and mindset prior to the pandemic and the move to remote, it's a very difficult transition. If you were already pretty agile, had pretty autonomous teams, much easier transition, much easier to adapt to that massive change. So moving forward, I think it's proven that agile ways of working, this agile mindset, this agile company culture is just critical to the success of the organization moving forward. This is everybody's biggest concern and was definitely the biggest concern when this forced move to remote happened. Are people working? And myself, as an agile coach, right, this has always bothered me, even co-located. Don't worry about capacities. Don't worry about utilization. You're looking at the wrong thing. So the common analogy has been, keep the eyes on the baton in a relay race, keep the eyes on the baton going around the track that 4 times, not on the runners. It's that baton getting around the track 4 times that wins the race. So the analogy being, keep your eyes on the flow of value. Figure out what your value streams are in your organization. Figure out how to optimize those value streams. Don't care so much about, are people busy? Are people working? How many activities are they doing? How many calls are they making? That doesn't matter. What matters is the flow of value from start to finish, from the idea to the development to the end user, to getting that to the actual end customer. That's what matters. Track the flow of value. Don't track tasks and activities. Okay, so built into Favro, another example here, I'm going to do it from a marketing team's perspective, which I think is very apropos, given our guests today. One of the easiest ways to track the flow of value is with a Kanban board like we have here. This is creating marketing content. The request comes in, the mock-up, creating that content, whatever that might happen to be, the review, the final art, all the way to done. So you can visualize, number one, just by putting this work in a visual Kanban board like this. So just by seeing things stacking up, maybe at the review stage, you're able to say, okay, well, we can see where the bottleneck in this flow of value is, right? But there's also other tools built into each and every board to help optimize and visualize the flow of value. So if I turn on, for example, through this little eye icon, both time on board and time in column, otherwise known as lead times and cycle times, this is great metrics, just real-time metrics built into this board. So I can see, okay, why has this, edit CSS style sheets for buttons been on the board? Why is the running lead time so far 45 days, right? And why has this particular card been stuck in mockup, time in column, cycle time for this particular stage, been stuck here for 6 days, right? Just very kind of generic examples of being able to visualize, are things getting stuck? Are things taking too long from start to finish? And are things taking too long at a particular stage? Another way to help identify, visualize, and optimize your flow. Another thing built into the board are control charts, cumulative flow diagrams. A control chart, if you're not familiar with it, it's going to tell you, and you get all this for free just by using the tool. It's going to tell you over time, what's your average time to completion once, in this case, a marketing asset enters the board. And this is real predictability data. You can say, okay, as of right now, as soon as a piece of content enters the board, it's going to take 20 days in this fictional example for that content to be delivered and finished. Each one of these, you mouse over each one of these, this indicates, in this case, a marketing asset. It's going to tell you the date that it did finish, and it's also going to tell you how long did it take at each and every stage. This is great metrics to be able to optimize, again, that flow of value. Okay, too many meetings, another common thing I hear all the time, working with different organizations. And too many meetings are not the problem. They're a symptom of the real problem. And the real problem is that you haven't developed this culture of autonomy. In order to have autonomy, you have to have organizational alignment. And a big part of that organizational alignment is the transparency in providing clear direction and clear goals. If you don't have clear direction and clear goals, then your teams, the people that you've hired to actually create this value, don't know what to do, which means you're going to have a ton of meetings, right? You have to have a meeting to figure out what you need to do next on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes even an hourly by hourly basis. So you need to have those clear goals, like you saw in maybe that portfolio Kanban. Everybody knows what the next most important thing is to work on, the next piece of value or goal or initiative that needs to be worked on. They don't have to ask, they have access to it. They have the transparency to see that. They also can't see work in progress, right? So they don't know where things are. Using a tool like Favro, like I just showed you in that marketing example, you can always see where things are. If you open up the card, you can see the conversations over here on the right-hand side, seeing exactly what's going on, right? So you can see that work in progress. You can see where things are stuck and where maybe you can help add to unstuck or improve that flow. and no way to communicate where the work is actually happening. So I'm going to show you an example in a couple of minutes of how, Favro can reduce the number of tools, including like maybe in the, email for sure, and also maybe to a certain extent, Slack and Microsoft Teams, because a tool like Favro actually allows you to communicate with if work is actually flowing on the cards that represent that value you're trying to create. Here over on this right-hand column, this is like a built-in Slack right here in context with the work. Moving on to collaboration and innovation, which has been proven to be a problem, certainly for people making the move to remote and not already working in an agile way. So if they didn't have autonomous teams, collaboration, not working face-to-face proved to be difficult. If they're already working in an agile way, it was kind of a no-brainer. They were already working in an autonomous cross-functional way, and it was a lot less painful to make that move. Teams have also proven that if you visualize your innovation pipelines the same way that you do your actual value creation pipelines, that's another tremendously easy way to continue to innovate in a remote and distributed world. And I have an article here, a link to it, that talks about that particular innovation process visualization and continuing to create that creativity and innovation, even in a remote and distributed type environment. So moving on to some of the actual solutions, it really just boils down, as Patrik alluded to three core things. It's, you got to have this remote and agile culture. You have to have remote or now hybrid agile processes, and you have to have tools that support remote and agile ways of working. So just to quickly boil these things down, a remote, agile, kind of hybrid type organization, it's got to have that trust and accountability built in. As Patrik mentioned, your leaders, first of all, you probably don't need as many quote unquote leaders. And second of all, they have to be thinking in more of a servant leadership way. They need to say, what's my job? My job is to drive this company forward from a high level. And all I need to do is provide the intent. What is it that we need to do? Set those goals and let the people take it from there, right? And then your job then becomes clearing the way, clearing the blocks, making it easy for them to provide that value once you've set the direction, once you've set the course. Now, in an agile organization, certainly in a remote and distributed organization, there's no place to show up to maybe anymore. So adding, there is no showing up. So how do you show up? You show up by adding value. And as I've already mentioned, you have to move to this. We don't hide things, right? Maybe you don't have 100% transparency, but you certainly provide transparency to the overall business goals and initiatives, all the way through to the product goals and initiatives, to what the teams themselves are working on across the entire organization, which a tool like Favro, as you've seen, allows you to do. From a remote process standpoint, again, it's all about focusing on the flow of value. So focus on your value streams. Number one, figure out what your value streams are if you haven't already done that, and then organize around those value streams. It's not just about team agility anymore. People might have said, as Patrik said in the beginning of this conversation, everybody thinks we're doing agile. Or first of all, you're not doing agile. You either are or you aren't. And second of all, just because you have a couple of Scrum teams, product development teams working in Scrum, that doesn't mean you're agile. It's about business agility. It's about removing the silos, the major silo of development team versus the business side of the organization. That can't exist anymore. So it's removing the silos, focusing on those value streams, and achieving true business organizational agility. One of the first steps in that is creating an overall company cadence. Everybody has to be working in the same basic cadence, from sprint to sprint, from release to release, from product increment to product increment, from quarter to quarter throughout the entire organization. You can't have teams all out of sync working in different cadences. It just doesn't work, especially in a remote and distributed type environment. If you don't already have them, You got to figure out how to create these self-managed autonomous teams, cross-functional teams. Again, like the ideal, you've got everybody, including marketing, even maybe in those teams to deliver that value ultimately to the customer. That's one step beyond DevOps. Company and team value delivery metrics. I've already shown you those kind of at the team level for that marketing team. In a tool like Favro, you're easily able to get that at the company level as well. How quickly are we delivering things on that portfolio Kanban that I showed you would be the same as how quickly are we delivering things at the content level for that marketing team. And then of course the remote tools, and you want to keep your tool stack as simple as possible. Like even me running a very small consultancy firm, found it very easy to keep adding tools upon tools upon tools. So think, change that mindset. How many tools, what's the minimum amount of tools that I can get away with to actually run this business? And in a perfect world, maybe you could boil it down to just these three. So like Zoom, everybody needs to use Zoom in a hybrid world, a remote distributed world. We found Slack for your asynchronous or even synchronous general discussions. And then a tool like Favro, maybe to do everything else. You can have those context-sensitive, contextual communications directly where the work is happening. You can even create the content directly on the cards. You don't need wikis anymore. You don't need Confluence. You don't need Google Docs. You can, thanks to the rich content creation, being able to add images, create attachments, link to other cards. You can do all of that on the card itself, where the work is actually happening. You can also be creating the actual content, writing marketing copy, for example, directly on the card. The planning and organization, organizing that work, organizing those ideas in Favro backlogs, organizing your teams in collection, organizing your teams of teams at program level, product level, value streams into what we call dashboard collections, and then collaborating, of course, in real time, regardless of location, on those boards, in those backlogs, on those cards, and then being able to visualize and manage the flow thanks to the built-in graphs, charts, and as you see right on the card, flow-based metrics. So I have one last example. This is just a quick example of cross-team collaboration. So I have a product development team, and it's working on all these different features for whatever this product might happen to be. So I have this particular feature here, enhanced performance, and I'm a software engineer working on this particular feature. I realize that I'm blocked. I've already pre-filled this conversation in here for the sake of time. I need the latest release of Jenkins to be able to test this performance enhancement. And I need somebody in IT to make that happen for me, so I'm blocked. So maybe the first thing I would do is just move this over to a blocked column. Thanks to some of the automations built into the tool, it automatically tags it as blocked, maybe assigns the Scrum Master to help remove that block, and turns the overall card red. Then I can start to have the conversation. I can say, this is what I need. Maybe I can either link to a card on the IT team's board, right? But even better, because the cards in Favro can exist in multiple boards and backlogs at the same time, I could simply take this card from my product team collection. I could have added the IT team's Kanban board, and I can drag that card directly, the same card, directly to the IT team's Kanban board, maybe putting it up here in their urgent lane, saying this is causing a block. And then they would maybe tag that as urgent. Continue to have the conversation with the software engineer, and then move that through all the way to, we've fixed this, we've made that Jenkins upgrade in this particular scenario. So all of that is visible here back on the product development team's board. They can see that from an IT team perspective, what needed to be done is now done. And now this could maybe move from blocked back to in progress, or maybe it's even ready for actual review. And block has now been removed, and it can quickly flow to the done column, which is, you know, the ideal. So one last thing, we've covered the benefits, the challenges, the 3 solutions simply broken down into culture, process, and tools. Just for future reference, after this webinar, Favro has built out this excellent collection of webinar interviews and face-to-face interviews pre-pandemic, these customer success stories from all different size organizations and also different industries. So there's great examples in here directly from the mouths of the people, you know, managing the work, doing the work within these different organizations, how they've used Favro, both co-located, hybrid, and in a pure remote and distributed way successfully for their teams and for their entire organizations. And that's just to be found at this link here, learn.favro.com/customer stories. Again, you'll get this in the collection that I share out to you. And last but not least, my company, Brightcove Insights, in collaboration with Favro to make the move to remote and this new hybrid way of working much more painless and also much more productive. We put together a series of quick starts that are industry specific. So here is an example of the enterprise quick start package. The whole goal is getting your entire enterprise onboarded on Favro, working in a more agile way, aligned and autonomous as quickly as possible. And we basically manage the whole process for you. It includes just the annual discount on the tool itself. We custom design all of the boards, the flows, the collections, help configure those with you and your teams. We also help with the integrations from Favro to your other business critical applications like Slack. Maybe you want to continue to use Jira for bug tracking, GitHub for your source control, the G Suite apps, so on and so forth. Help you migrate from existing tools to Favro. There's also some certification and training built into this 5 days to get you up and running as fast as possible in the tool. All that information can be found here on the Brightcove website. That is it. And I thank everybody for attending. And I'm going to stop my share. And if there are any questions now, anybody still online, feel free to ask those. We're happy to answer them.
There were a few questions directed to us, kind of panelists, that I answered in the meantime here in written form. I can just pick a few of them. So one question was a little bit around kind of, you know, lateral leadership and his role in an agile organization, and obviously lateral leadership has a relatively much bigger role in an agile organization. And you know, what I think is one of the best courses to take to practice your skills there is something called the problem solving leadership workshop, which is actually a whole week workshop where you kind of locked away from society. So it's a bit almost like Survivor, and you kind of learn both the theory, but you also experience. That one is absolutely amazing. You know, I personally did that one back when Jay Weinberg, who created this, was alive. It was an amazing experience, but it's still run by, for example, Esther Derby, who's probably the best writer in the Agile community on retrospectives and many other things. So that one's highly recommended. A somewhat more lightweight version of that, I would, you know, probably recommend doing something called the human element. It doesn't really have anything to do with Agile, but it really helps you to become more of a servant leader. So yeah, some things there. Also, I got some questions on, okay, so Agile leadership. Well, you know, one of the great reads there are, you know, Jürgen Appello's, you know, Management 3.0. That's a great read on kind of Agile leadership. And finally, I would also say that if you're thinking about this a little bit more from, let's say, a kind of senior management point of view, kind of, you know, how to organize, probably the best book out there is called The Art of Action by Stephen Bungey. I don't think it mentions the word Agile a single time in the book, but it's really what this is about. It's about, how do you organize an autonomous teams that are also aligned. And in many ways, you could say that, Favro was really designed for, enabling that kind of organization. So there you have a couple of things.
But Patrick, let me give you a comment in terms of this lateral leadership, which I actually think is the whole concept of working cross-functional and work laterally across the organization. One of the things that I was focusing on and when we started to apply this methodology was if there's someone in R&D that wants to do a project that is important, they could actually run a card with resources from marketing. So it's like you just break up the structure and you start to work cross-function, and I think that's so powerful.
Cool. And so, also for like follow-up conversations, I had one message there on kind of continued conversation around this. Feel free to ping me at patrick.palm@favro.com. We do also have a partner network, so a conversation like that can simply be just like a good conversation, good online coffee. But we also do have avenues for becoming a partner and working with Favro and with end customers. And that can be, in both a more informal way, and we also have more formal ways where, there's also business opportunities, for you around that, for the ones of you that are coaches that are listening in here. So we do have openings for that as well. Cool. I think we need to wrap up now, John. Super thanks, Patrick, for joining.
Great to be here.
Very often when we have these webinars, we talk about product development. And it's great that we had a chance now to bring in a perspective on market, go-to-market strategies, your framework. And I'm really looking forward to your upcoming papers here with some. The draft I did look at was very well written. It's very, very concrete. So if for all of you that want something a bit kind of pretty compact and spot on, I think the upcoming papers from Patrick will be a really good read. Cool. All right. Super. All right. Thank you so much. Talk to you later.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye bye.